Well, this is Jim, the conspiracy guy, normally hosting the FITS Presents, where my expected guest this evening was Dr. Catherine Horton, but where I'm distraught to report that she is missing in action. I'm hoping that she's well, but she's perhaps the most targeted individual on the face of planet Earth. I am a huge fan of Catherine. She belongs in my pantheon of American heroes, and it's very distressing to me that she is not here to join me this evening, presuming she's well, but somehow couldn't make our engagement. I will look forward to featuring her again. Meanwhile, as a substitute, although it's highly unexpected and very different from the subject that I expected to present, I'm going to share with you a report I did about 9/11, who was responsible and why, as an alternative, which I readily concede cannot compensate for the missing Catherine Horton, who's a simply sensational person, but where I will reschedule her. So let me see if I can make this work. I'm still learning the subtleties of this business, and it should be the case. That we're starting to share the video. I think I need to get it full screen if I can. And initiate. Let's see if it'll work. I'm just making sure it's actually broadcasting for you. Maybe not. So no Catherine. Very disappointing. Okay, let me see if I can make this work. I'm going to give it a shot. No guarantees. We'll see what happens here.
Welcome to Brian Ruhe Show. Today is June the 1st, 2017. My guest is on for the second time. It's Professor Jim Fetzer. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and he's got a very deep knowledge on 9/11. He's the founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth back in 2005. So that's what we're going to talk about. So Jim, welcome back to the show.
Oh, Brian, it's a great pleasure to be back with you. I didn't mean to leap ahead here to the very first slide, but it's a real pleasure. And I enjoy, especially appreciate having the opportunity to talk about 9/11.
Yeah.
The first thing you need to understand about 9/11 is that the security team at all three of the airports, Logan in Boston, Newark, and Dulles International, was an Israeli firm called ICTS. That's
an Israeli firm.
That's your first clue that something here funny is going on. Now, these flight trajectories are highly imaginative. I notice in particular at the bottom for Flight 77, that dotted line, you see, that shows it heading out toward the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, what have you.
Yeah.
I mean, this is 77. It actually is supposed to made it out to around Ohio and then turn around and come back. But that dotted line is where it was off of radar. So they actually don't have a radar tracking for it, which frankly is absurd because the United States covers every square inch of the country with radar. You can see right above it Flight 93 out of Newark, which is supposed to have crashed in Shanksville, and that's the first case we'll examine close up and personal. And then the other two, of course,
I think
Logan 11.
I think this is so awkward that I'm going to have to try something else, a different variation. You think after all these years, I would know that you have to have a backup. Let's see what we can do here. Okay. Very good. This is the very same slide set used for that original show, but we'll now go through it in effect, as though it were for the first time. As soon as I see that it's actually broadcasting as it ought to be, we'll go for it. Now, as before, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Put them in caps so I can easily pull them out. This was originally broadcast on the 1st of June, 2017. The 1st of June, 2017. Well, it doesn't seem to be showing here. Let's see. Not good, not good, not good, not good. So why not? Why am I not getting it to go? You know, oh. Catherine is here, I'm very happy to say. Let me see if I can get this to work. How are you?
Hello.
I'm thrilled. I was very worried.
Hell freezes over every single time you do anything important.
Yes,
So,
yes. Let me see if I can get us together here on the screen.
I think from my view, your head is cut off. I think if you tilt your camera a bit up.
Yeah, I'll fix that. I just got to get us set so we're actually... Okay. I think this will work. Yes, yes, yes. Of course. I'm just so delighted to have you here. I got to make sure now this is broadcasting.
Uh-huh.
I have a separate computer here to show me that it's coming through, which I would like to believe is the case. How have you been?
It has been crazy since the start of the year, I have to say, especially during the COVID shutdown, the criminality went completely crazy. I mean, completely rudderless and boundless and absolutely unfettered, you know. It is just, you know, I think these people are drunk on their own power, basically. So I had major breakthroughs. I discovered that William Binney, you know, the NSA whistleblower, he is implanted and is being tortured. He's also, his house is being shot with directed energy weapons, so he's now completely on board as well, you know. So I've been working with him trying to investigate all this. Meanwhile, my family is being attacked and also...
Oh, Catherine, this is just horrifying. I can't see that it's actually broadcasting yet. I've got to make sure we are where we ought to be. We're live. I have the screen.
Are you broadcasting on YouTube or are you on the...
It's multiple channels, Catherine, actually about 5 different channels, but we should be.
That is advanced.
Yeah, I know. The problem is I can't tell if anyone can hear or see us, and obviously...
So on my end, Zoom usually indicates when we're live, but I don't see a live, you know, marker.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, let me see what's going on here. They can hear us, but for some reason, they can't see us. Maybe that'll do it. Maybe that'll do it. Let me see here now. I think maybe, but give me a second more because we're going to be conversing for a good while. So I want to make sure it's getting out there. Bill Binney's a sensational guy. My God, he's one of my heroes, that he's being tortured and implanted. And this is horrific.
Yeah, I think the image that's emerging is that anybody who's anything, anywhere, has been systematically implanted, you know, precisely for the situation. So when they are rolling out the Nazi takeover, that they can torture anybody who might stand in their way, you know.
Catherine, I just don't get why we don't seem to be going out. Oh,
I think because it starts with N and ends in A. I think that's
you think? All right. It's obviously not beyond the realm of possibility. Let me see here. If I've got us now. Maybe I seem to be making progress. We have the two of us, but we're only on half the image. So let me see what I can do here. Catherine, it's going to be kind of crazy, but I think we're going to have to go ahead, even though the broadcast is going to be pretty strange. Let me see one more minute and we'll move forward.
just take your time. Sometimes it helps switching the gallery view on Zoom on and back off, because it then sends the channels differently again. It just restarts the channel send. You know how on Zoom you have the speaker view and then a gallery view, and you can just toggle between the two. Sometimes that helps.
Yes. But the problem isn't the Zoom, is the restreaming where I have the problem. So yes. But the problem isn't the Zoom, it's the restreaming. See, there you can hear me talking about it, but wow, this is amazing.
This happens every time, really every time. So, it's quite, God, I've seen so much
Please know that I'm reconnecting with Catherine, and we're going to try to get this right. And I appreciate that you were telling me what was going on in the chat room. Please know that I'm reconnecting with Catherine, and we're going to try to get this right. And I appreciate that you were telling me what was going on in the chat room. Please know that I'm reconnecting with Catherine, and we're going to try to get this right. And I appreciate that you were telling me. Let's see what we got here now. Please know that I'm reconnecting with Catherine, and we're going to try to get this right. And I appreciate that you were telling. Let's see what we got here now in the chat room. Please know that I'm reconnecting with Catherine, and try to get this right. And I appreciate.
Advanced deep threading to do that, you know.
Yes. Let me see, Catherine. Damn. Okay, I got an idea.
Advanced deep threading to do that, you know.
There we go. I think I got just speaker view here. This may work. Let me see, Catherine. Damn. Okay, I got an idea. There we go. I think I got just speaker view here. This may work. Let me see, Catherine. Okay, I got an idea. There we go. I think I got just speaker view here. This may work. Okay, for all of you out there in the audience, I'm just so thrilled. Very glad that you have hung in here. Catherine and I are going to continue our conversation. We're actually going to do a recap. For all of you out there in the audience, I'm just so thrilled. You hear that, Catherine?
Yes.
Okay, so at least we know now the sound is going out. Okay. Well, this is
just push up your camera a little bit more because I think it keeps going down. Bit more. It's perfect. It's probably going to slip down with time, but that's ideal.
Okay. Well, you and I can see each other well. Dr. Catherine Horton, PhD, Oxford in particle physics, who's been a target of directed energy weapons, become an expert in the field, leading the legal charge against us, telling us about Bill Binney, who is like the nation's leading expert on cybersecurity, has himself now been implanted, tortured. He's been hit with flesh-eating bacteria twice, which cannot be a random occurrence, has to be deliberate. They're trying to kill him. And Catherine, what a gruesome way to do it.
Yeah, I think, you know what, as I've been investigating these crimes, in the background, I have a lot of people who are very public, victims who are very public, people like Karen Melton Stewart and Dr. Millicent Black and Melanie Richan, with whom I worked in the past. But in the background, I've talked to a lot of professionals from all fields, including retired judges and, that one Hollywood actors very public about targeting, and behind the scenes, I've just met more and more people, and I think the general public would be amazed how many people are affected by this. So I wasn't that surprised to hear that about Bill Binney, but I think Bill Binney is one of the people who's been most severely hit because he's such a high-ranking person. As I said in the previous broadcast attempt, he is, to my knowledge, the highest-ranking whistleblower in U.S. history. And he blew the whistle on not just mass surveillance, or as I would call it, mass human trafficking of the American population by NSA, but also, the Russiagate hoax and many, many other things where he proved that CIA was involved. Now, the other thing to note about this, and I should say that Bill Binney has publicly revealed all this. He spoke, I think, for the first time about his targeting on Ann Vandersteel's Steel Truth not that long ago. So I think it's okay that I say all these things. But I think the public needs to know, to understand just how much help Bill and I need to have this stopped. And also they need to kind of, be sensitized to the typical types of attacks that places like NSA, CIA, and the FBI would launch against innocent victims, So Bill has spoken publicly about being assaulted with directed energy weapons, and also his family members. He also spoke publicly about the fact that he found a non-consensual chip implant in his leg, or rather his amputated leg. This chip must have been, as we think, been put in during the last amputation, or the amputation of the leg. And that chip is being used to torture him most violently. So he's being sleep deprived. He used to be sleep deprived 2 nights out of 7. So 2 nights per week. After he got an x-ray proving that there's a foreign body where he feels the pain, the torture went to 5 to 6 nights per week. So it's basically complete CIA-style torture techniques. It's sleep deprivation torture. This was used in all concentration camps around the world, in any sort of torture facilities. And basically you have, one of the American heroes being tortured now, live. And NSA is directly involved because, as I keep pointing out, the infrastructure that drives his torture and my torture, which I was tortured, in his presence in the US when we worked together. I was tortured in US hospitals. I was tortured, all across several US states that I visited. So the IT infrastructure that lies behind this is completely controlled by NSA. They control all the signals across not just the internet in the US, but anywhere in the world. They have emails and internet traffic, through sniffers. They have collected it anywhere in the world. They can map the entire world population and their social networks. Now, I'm pretty sure when there's a hospital sending torture signals, the signals and the infrastructure of those signals is completely monitored by NSA. So when Bill Binney blew the whistle on NSA criminality, and then ends up losing both his legs in what must be, statistically speaking, targeted by weapon attacks as opposed to just random flukes. And by the way, he didn't just have 2 flesh-eating bacterial infections. He had a total of 6. 6 independent ones, right? 2 of which led to the loss of both of his legs. So, this is extreme assaults with bioweapons that are banned by the Geneva Conventions. And these are bioweapons being used not just to, in a warlike situation, in an illegal war, but it's also being used against civilians. So every category of the Geneva Conventions is being violated by no other than NSA. I'm sure they get help from CIA and also the FBI, which is shown to be involved in targeting people in the past in other cases. But people have to realize that we're not dealing with, intelligence agencies like they portray themselves to be. We are dealing with, war criminals and the worst organized criminals that anybody can imagine, So these people will assault any whistleblower, even when they are as public as Bill Binney, and they will torture him, even though he's a man in his mid-70s. They will torture him, literally, and try to torture him to death. Now, one of the things I would like to point out is in every single case I deal with, there's always, basically a red thread that shows the personality structure of the attackers and their, psychological profile. A lot of them are sexual perverts. So in most cases that I deal with, there's remote controlled rape involved or any other type of sexual violence, sexual mutilation, burning of genitals with directed energy weapons and that sort of stuff. So you can already conclude who you're dealing with or what kind of person you're dealing with when you are looking at the details. Now, in Bill Binney's case, most people might not know, but his original body height is 6'3", which is rather tall. So when he is made to lose both his legs, it's clear that it must be rather short people in NSA who have an ego issue with the fact that he was not just tall, he was also a math genius and brilliant. Okay, so I think the perpetrator that we're looking for is male and rather short. Now, I wonder who that might be. Anybody in the NSA leadership who might be rather short? You know, I think we can identify the person, you know.
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, Catherine. But
criminological, you know, analysis there, but there's much, much more that actually leads straight back to these attackers. But for the average American, what it actually means is that the people who launch these type of bioweapon attacks and who are torturing, you know, a man in his mid-70s like that, who's already a double amputee, it's the same people who hold the most private data, including the medical data about you. Every single American, and I actually think every single person around the planet. Okay, because all the medical data is now sent over the internet, so would have been picked up by NSA and stored forever in facilities like the one in Bluffdale, Utah. You know, so I want every person to kind of take this in, that these organized criminals and torturers and war criminals and complete sexual perverts and psychopaths hold every last private detail about you and your life from pretty much the last 15 to 20 years, and will hold it forever. Now, is that a cause for concern? I would say, oh, hell yes. You know?
Well, and Catherine, I've been very worried that they're going to use this coronavirus phenomenon, which is largely fabricated. They have falsified the data. They've now introduced a new technique, a new definition, where if there's one person who has the virus, which doesn't mean they're sick or have symptoms, and we know persons who are asymptomatic aren't contagious, that if they have contact with others, that they're counting them as also having the coronavirus, which has multiplied the number on the average by 17, which is why we're having this explosion now, when in fact the number of deaths has been steadily dropping, so that they can manipulate the public. And, you know, the governors are either not very smart or they're complicit. But what I'm leading up to is I'm convinced that the whole idea of this vaccine is to implant every single one of us with a chip.
I think so. And it's not even necessarily a chip anymore. I think a lot of people without their knowledge carry chips. I think it will be an advanced nanotechnology. You know, it could also be stuff that actually goes through the blood-brain barrier, which is what they're ultimately after. Ultimately, they're after brain degradation and brain control. But, you know, if you can degrade the brain, that's just as well. They don't really want to control. They want to maim and kill, you know. So I absolutely agree with you. I should also point out that I've been following the coronavirus, you know, debunking around the world, and now several countries have debunked it. I think the president of Tanzania has debunked how the testing for coronavirus is so fake and so absolutely incorrect. They even testified, I think, papaya fruit and goats.
President of Tanzania. Papaya, motor oil, goats. All but the motor oil didn't turn out positive, but the goats and the papaya, the fruit did. I mean, Catherine, this is just so insulting.
It's basically, you know what, this is what happens when stupid people try to do science and medicine. You basically get bullshit, okay? So bullshit in, bullshit out with every test, every scientific
Yes.
The other thing we should also keep in mind is that the people who are running this, none of them are actually licensed to practice medicine. So when the governor, you know, puts in any sort of medical measures, he is not actually licensed to practice medicine. So that's one thing. The other thing that people, especially America, should keep in mind that already when you have governors, the governors is a term that, apart from the US, exclusively applies to colonies. A governor is somebody who governs a colony on extraterritorial territory for another country. So when people are wondering where all this nonsense might be coming from, well, it's from your colonial masters. Okay, so as soon as you have a governor in a US state, it is a colony, people. Okay, look it up. You can actually look it up in dictionaries. And the governor is only used for two things, colonies and, funnily enough, the US states. Now, what might be the connection there? And this is important because everything that I have seen so far is pointing back at the old colonial masters, namely the crown, which most people know as the British crown, which is actually just a small franchise of a much bigger crown, which is actually the Vatican criminal empire, and the Crown Corporation, which is a global entity. But anyway, that aside, when individuals are thinking, what does this mean? That I now hear that William Binney, a famous NSA whistleblower, is being tortured with chips and directed energy weapons. What does that mean for me and my life? And what does all this coronavirus stuff mean for me and my life? Well, I think we all have to wake up to the fact that we are now in pretty much a global Nazi takeover. So everything that has been coming down the pipe so far has been following, down to the last T, the Nazi template. Okay, so the Patriot Act is, exactly like Nazi, laws that came down on the German people. And for example, the coronavirus lockdown is just like curfews you have during a war-like situation. The fact that, your governors and your local state and federal government believes that they have access to your medical file and can have control over your medical state or your body is also very much a Nazi idea, and should your body not be in the right state, they can take measures to exclude you, put you into places where you have a very high likelihood to die, for example, hospitals, So really, I think this is now the wake-up call, and every American needs to realize that they do have to know about microchip implants, because they very likely, if they don't have them, their kids very likely will have them already. Unfortunately, that's what my research shows. The other thing that they have to know is that these non-consensual implants, these microchips, will be completely painless and absolutely unnoticed to the point when they are actually turned on. Okay, so the vast majority of people, including myself, will be running around for a decade or more without even noticing they have these chips. But when these chips are turned on, these microchips can mimic the pain signal of the body, but because it's a synthetically generated signal, it is much stronger than anything that the nervous system can produce. So in other words, I think what they're trying to do in William Binney's case is actually make him relive or actually feel an anesthetized amputation, because they put the chip exactly where his leg was amputated. So in other words, they want to torture him with excruciating pain, even if he, managed to cope with the amputation to start with quite well. So you see the sadism, the psychopathy. Also, you can already tell that it must be rather short men who maybe are lacking in other departments doing this, right? But you also see that these people are completely unfettered by publicity, it being publicly known, it being reported to the police, because they are not just drunk on power, they own every single branch of the state. They own the police, they own the governors, wholesale, or most of them at least. They own a very large part of the judiciary. And right now the question is, what can we all do? Okay, and this is very, very scary. And this is what I've been dealing with this year, when I finally realized, oh my God, what I've been saying at the start of this year is exactly right. Anybody who is anyone, anywhere, has already been implanted. If you're a whistleblower, or if you're a police officer, or a judge, or a journalist, or anybody known in the public sphere or have any sort of power, you have got to check yourself for microchip implants, because you are very likely implanted. Number two, if you are doing anything to fight this crime, or even just taking measures to protect yourself and not even publicly fighting this crime, you will have to expect to be tortured at some point. Isn't that nice? And then you will also wake up to the fact that none of your doctors, or very, very few doctors, are willing to help you. And you will have to wake up to the fact that the police will absolutely refuse to help you, and they might even abuse you more, So this is the state we're in right now. And as far as I'm concerned, I have tried to get the German police to stop my torture or the directed energy weapon attacks on me. Sometimes in very confined places like my parental home or my own home, or, other relatives' homes, where, any weapon must have a direct line of sight. It was physically impossible. The German federal police, the Bundeskriminalamt, refused to help me. The English police absolutely refused to help me, and in fact sent one guy to so-called investigate my case, or rather, throw it in, kick it into the long grass, who seemed to be involved, at least, be part of an event that indicates that a female police officer might have been murdered with a directed energy weapon. Okay, so it's weird to the nth degree. The Swiss police also refused to help. So in all these countries, and I also reported these crimes to the FBI for others, several times, and I sent a cease and desist to them myself so that I can be safe on my trips to the US, which I'm absolutely not at the moment, and they still refuse to help. So the FBI is involved in this criminality. The German police, the Swiss police, and the UK police are fully knowledgeable and fully involved. Now, in this situation, when the police are committing these crimes or helping or acquiescing to these crimes being committed, what can the individual do? And all of the politicians know about these crimes. All of them have refused to assist. I think everybody in Congress knows about this. Everybody in the House of Lords knows about this by now, and the House of Commons and the German Bundestag. The Swiss government has known about it for over 10 years and has refused to help. So when we can't have the government people, help us, nor the police, what is left? And as far as I'm concerned, the only place where an individual can go to enforce their rights is the courts. So this year I'm working flat out, including with Bill Binney, to try to get my court case properly into the court, but I struggled with cyber hacking, with extreme assaults and extreme torture last time I went to London in December 2019. To present my case to the judge. That time my digital bundle was hacked and I couldn't even download it and print it for the court case. And then the judge just kind of chuckled and just threw me out of the court and said, well, next time just print off your court bundle, present your particulars of claim. And he didn't even allow me to speak to say, yes, but I was cyber hacked, so I can't even present my case. So I need an injunction stopping the defendants from continually hacking me. One time they even deleted 175 pages of my particulars of claim, one of the drafts, and they hacked a computer that had never been in the internet before. So, at this stage, what can you do as an individual, So all I can report is that for those people who have been following your channel about the false flags, we're now way past the false flags. They seem like child's play. Compared to what's coming down the pipe now. But at the same time, you need to study those false flags to understand the hidden language, to understand the methods and how FEMA, for example, is involved in all of them, to understand what's going on now. But I can say that since the start of the year, the attacks have been extreme beyond anything I've ever seen. They are ever more overt, and the secret services and the secret societies that are connected to them are drunk on their power. They are now completely beyond anything that one would recognize as sane. And they are basically all out to maim and torture and kill as many people as they possibly can, with no regards to how publicly they are doing it. So we are now at the stage where literally the FBI, CIA, and NSA and all their counterparts in Germany, in the United Kingdom, and in Switzerland are conducting public executions. So, the question is, what shall we do? So the people who are affected, they should start with, first of all, finding their chips so that they understand where these, the intense pain that they might feel comes from. That really helps if you're not dying. It's just a chip mimicking your pain signals, number one. Number two, we really need help triangulating the sources of the directed energy weapons. I can prove that directed energy weapons are now being put into cars that are patrolling the motorways in the US and in Europe and will assault anybody who, they have on their target list. They also book themselves into hotels and will assault people in hotel rooms. They love it to assault people at their workplace and office buildings, anywhere where they can't really get away. For example, also on airplanes, So we have this rampant criminality and open maiming and killing everywhere in the US and in Europe. And for those who are affected, that's their first, the first steps is finding the chips, trying to shield. For example, I sometimes travel with literally a baking tray, a metal baking tray in my handbag which I will hold over my head if I'm on an airplane, if the terror stalkers, again, put a directed energy weapon in the locker above my seat on the aircraft. So I literally have to sit and shield myself from a directed energy weapon on most air flights. I often had to change my seats because I was gunned and so on. So that is now the normality in inverted commas these days. Now, for those people who are not affected by this insanity, what they have to understand is that really they are targeted too. They just haven't noticed yet. Catherine Austin Fitts, who's the former Assistant Secretary for Housing, she said in the US and in Europe, there are only two types of people. Those who know that they are targeted and those who haven't figured that out yet, So if you are not affected by chip torture and directed energy weapon attacks and frequent cyber hacking, like James Fetzer just experienced it now, you have to understand that you too are being a target, but you're being targeted in stealth. Your medical data is being trafficked, it's being prepared to be used against you at the smallest sign. Your private data, anything that you might have sent to anybody will be used against you in any way for blackmail or for any other purposes. And, you have to now take measures either to implode, anything that can be used as a control file, take measures to protect yourself against that, maybe talk to a lawyer and say, well, this could be coming down the pipe and what shall I do if, anybody tries to blackmail me like that and so on. But then the most important thing for everybody to do is, first of all, support the people who are fighting on the front lines. And second of all, please help us to stop the money flow to these intelligence agencies and a large part of the military that's involved, and also to military contractors like Lockheed Martin, that has been proved by my former colleague Karen Melton Stewart to be involved in terror stalking and directed energy weapon assaults on Americans, and I think 46 out of the 50 plus states. So we really have to cut the money flow, which is actually terrorist financing. And that means cutting the money flow to CIA, to NSA and the FBI, and also to places like DARPA that are massively involved in developing the technology that's being used to target and torture Americans and Europeans. So really, when these people, who are now putting up other fake events that you'll recognize, James, they're talking about Black Lives Matter and this and defunding the police and all that in orchestrated events and, other government hoaxes. No, we don't defund the police. If anything, we have to defund CIA and NSA. That's really the first step, because the police has a public face. They do have some public accountability. In contrast, the NSA has no public face. That's actually truthful. It's also not CIA. And they are absolutely not accountable to anybody, but they're, secret masters abroad. So really, their assets have to be frozen, their funding has to be cut, and there has to be a full audit, an absolutely full audit for every last penny of the money that CIA is receiving now and has received in the past. The same with NSA and also the FBI. And other shadowy organizations that exist, in the background, including InfraGard, which I think is associated with the Department of Homeland Security and other places. And I also would like to point out to your viewers that they have to be aware of a new accounting standard that Catherine Austin Fitts blew the whistle on, which is instrumental in funding all these criminal programs. And it's the new accounting standard called FASB 56, so FASAB 56. It sounds on the face of it boring like hell, but is actually the key to funding these murderous programs. So what FASB 56 says, as I understand it, but please, I refer everybody to Catherine Austin Fitts and her broadcasts, I think especially on USA Watchdog with Greg Hunter, where she explained it in detail, and she also does so on her Solari.com website. But FASB 56 allows any local council, city, state, or federal government entity to divert as much money as they want to so-called black projects, which should rather be called criminal projects, without having to give any accounts how much money was used and what it's being used for.
Yeah, it's all just staggering. It appears to me there's an effort here to actually destroy the United States. I mean, physically, psychologically, socially, that these techniques of social distancing and face masking and the lockdowns, I mean, Catherine, it's just staggering what's going on here. The enormity, the scale, the scope. This has been thought through in a diabolical plan, using this virtually imaginary virus to render Americans paralyzed with fear, incapable of the exercise of reason. I mean, it's just astonishing. They have, as I said before, traded on elementary fallacy of ambiguity by talking about cases and treating instances of testing positive for having the coronavirus with being sick and contagious. So, as I suggested before, by redefining, they've just exploded the numbers, and the public has falsely concluded that all these people who are sick, when they simply have the coronavirus, you or I would probably test positive for the coronavirus, because actually, as I understand it, there is no test specifically for the so-called CV-19 coronavirus, but there's a whole family, including for the common cold. They're in the coronavirus family. They're ubiquitous. So, I mean, the ingenuity that went into planning this is just astonishing, where among the very few oversights, they didn't realize there was an inexpensive, widely available treatment that works as a wonder drug, hydroxychloroquine, so that they had to perform an attempt to rebut it when it emerged that this was actually wonderful. There was an article about it published in the Journal of Virology in 2005 that completely vindicated hydroxychloroquine, so that Dr. Anthony Tony the Rat Fauci, as I refer to him, has known since 2005 that no one had to die from coronavirus. We could all take hydroxychloroquine. And if you look at the countries where they've used hydroxychloroquine, their mortality rate is much, much lower. Those that have, some use and some not, intermediate, and those that eschew it altogether are the highest of all. But this whole thing, this was decades in the planning, Catherine, decades.
It absolutely was. And also, when you're thinking about who can possibly plan this and what sort of expertise do you need, it points back to the perpetrators directly. I mean, in any type of government crime, it is of such a vast scale, you can't hide the people involved. It is physically impossible. So what I would encourage everybody to do is just sit down with pen and paper, and when you see, the false flags and any other government criminality, think about who must have been involved to pull this off, and who must have either turned a blind eye or literally pretended to be stupid for this to be pulled off. And then you already have, a very long list of people who should be indicted and should be jailed, So really, I think what the whole coronavirus thing is, and by the way, I am studying what I call cartel signaling. This is the secret language of these secret societies and secret services with which they communicate with their own myriad little minions and employees all around the world, And they have to announce what exactly they are doing to everybody, so that, this mega corporation that's running all this behind the scenes, doesn't end up in a muddle because their own employees, kind of have to get their wires crossed. So in everything that they do using cartel signaling, they outline what is happening. And the cartel signaling I analyzed in one of my broadcasts that was coming down from Fox News in one of their little clips was basically that this is military recruitment. And at the time, I didn't understand what exactly the mechanism is for military recruitment. This is just a message from secret symbols that were in little broadcasts that I kind of, analyzed. Now, if you just entertain this idea that the whole coronavirus, hoax was basically just a stepping stone for something much bigger, what could you possibly use it for? Now, I would like to point out that the number of businesses that have basically been rendered bankrupt by force through coronavirus is absolutely staggering. So a lot of people who were self-employed before are now seriously struggling on financial distress. So they can, they are on the hook, either to their debtors or to people who give them grants. Now, many people falsely believe that the United States is actually a capitalist country. It absolutely is not. And it was actually Catherine Austin Fitts who pointed that out to me. She says a lot of people don't know that every second paycheck in the United States comes from the government. So every second person gets their income from the government by one way or another, either through food stamps or, through some benefits, or actually is directly employed by the government. So if you look at the country in terms of the pie chart, half of that pie chart is already pretty much paid for by the government. So the government can exert pressure on its own employees and anybody who's on benefits, by threatening to withdraw the benefits, either overtly or by some means covertly, and can make those people do whatever they want to do just to survive. Now, who is left in a country to stand in the way of a government like that? Well, the biggest, fought against this tyranny is actually self-employed people who have an independent way to generate their income, and therefore, in principle, cannot be blackmailed, at least not blackmailed through that mechanism. Now, if you start destroying and by force shutting down those self-employed businesses and rendering those people, helpless, and then, putting them in financial distress, you end up owning them as well. So you seriously reduce the number of people standing your way. Now, the early reports that I heard was, I think, about 25% of the businesses might not reopen. So I have to check what the current number is now. But if you think about the pie chart and these self-employed businesses, if you think it might be as much as half the other population that's not owned by the government, and 25%, so a quarter of that pie, half of the pie, big pie, is now basically, destroyed, you can see how the government managed to get the majority, basically annihilated. Nobody's left to stand in their way. They have the majority rule in the American, the U.S. states.
I think that's a brilliant observation. In the beginning, I took a look at the data, and there were 5.7 million companies in the United States, 90% of which had 20 employees or fewer. 75% Investment Watch blog estimate could not survive 1 month without any revenue. We're well past that. I'm convinced at least 40% of all those small businesses have been permanently destroyed, bankrupt, taken out, and that the eventual number will be much higher. So it's completely consistent with what you're observing here, Catherine, and what David Icke observed right off the bat, that this was an effort to wipe out the middle class and small businesses. So you'd only have the mighty giants, like Amazon.com and Walmart and Costco and whatever. But where the small retail businesses that have been so wonderful in America are really wiped off the map.
Yes, and I think the whole thing is actually a military program, because when you wipe out the people who have an independent source of income and you make them dependent on the government, either through its grants to keep the business, in business during the lockdown, or by some other means, debt relief, anything, you end up, having them in your pocket. So you can push down whatever you want to. And this is done in parallel with this new FASB 56 accounting standard. That means you can divert as much money as you want to basically black or AKA criminal military programs. Okay, that's what black programs are. The only reason they are black is because they're criminal and secret. Okay, so if you now take the two, so on one end you take people out of the out of their employment or their self-employment, and then you have another huge pool of money. They can have endless money as long as these people join a black project, right? What do you end up with? You end up with a Nazi military takeover. Nazi, because it's actually a very small number of insiders that, by the way, are actually traditionally white because they come from the European continent. But that aside, right, they can take over anybody and then kill anybody in their path. This could be black people, but it could also be white people, right? I remind everybody that the Nazis killed mostly white people, So they also killed socialists. They killed the intellectuals. They killed anybody who wasn't submitting to this, basically criminal business plan of the Nazis to enrich themselves. And that's exactly what we see now. So the coronavirus hoax, the shutdown that ensued, this targeted destruction of self-employed businesses, directed energy weapons and chip implants all feed into the very same criminal military programs.
Catherine, I worry terribly as to whether we really have a serious prospect of coping with all of this and surviving and thriving as a nation. It has seemed to me the one guy who might be able to pull it off is the president, and that's why he's being so massively attacked. He came from the outside. He wasn't under their control. He wasn't a creature of the establishment. He was not only not part of the swamp, but he wanted to drain the swamp. I have never seen anything like the viciousness of the attacks on this guy from every direction, every source, on all kinds of manifestly absurd grounds. And it's as though there's this large segment of the population that is suffering from the mass illusion, Orange Man bad. You know, I mean, it's just incredible to me. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, and I find it so. I mean, I remind everybody that Donald Trump is also a billionaire, and unfortunately, in the deep state climate that existed, you didn't become a billionaire unless you somehow, to some extent, accommodated these people. Otherwise, they would have acid stripped you by midday. But I have long said a long time ago that people need to wake up to the following thing, okay? According to my analysis that I did after I analyzed the legal system, the financial system, currencies, and I found the very same cartel over and over. And I was trying to understand where this cartel is heading, what's its next business plan. I think everybody around the world, regardless of their income and skin color, has to understand the following thing. Most of us are small fries for this big organized crime cartel that is now global. So if you're self-employed and you've just been destroyed, you're still just small fish. You will be used as foot soldiers and cannon fodder, if anything, if you're lucky. The real prize for this big organized crime cartel are the biggest pools of wealth in the US and Europe. Now, which are those? The richest individuals, the biggest landowners, the people who own the most stuff, okay? In Europe, for sure, these are the royal families, okay? In America, because on paper, at least, you don't have a royal family, these are the billionaires and trillionaires and gazillionaires you have silently, living in the United States. So the real target of this round of asset stripping of this big organized crime cartel are really the royal families and the billionaires. Now, I said that, I think about 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and, I was hoping that more billionaires and more royal families would wake up and realize, even if they traditionally schmooze with this organized crime cartel, many of them would be, high up in the Masons, high up in this whole secret society. This secret society eats its own children, okay? The symbol of this global Vatican crime cartel is the snake that eats its own tail. Okay, and there are past historical examples of this. For example, when the French king was asset stripped in the French Revolution, that was organized by the Vatican and pushed through with the help of the Masonic networks. The same thing when the Russian Tsar was basically annihilated. Okay, so there are several precedents of this. And at this time around, I think they're going for all the European royal families and all the American billionaires. In a sense, they are now ripe for picking. They're at the peak of their power. They can now be taken. And the way this organized crime cartel works is that the very top, the most brutal psychopathic families within the global crime cartel will be eating up all the others. Okay? So if you're a billionaire, it means you're already not a trillionaire. So you are on the shit end of this stick. Okay? If you're a traditional royal family or any type of aristocrat in Europe, you too are now ripe for picking. Now, the question is, who are the people who will be, replacing you? Well, these will be a class of nouveau riche, new aristocrats, okay? And there's one royal on record. I think Dr. Rima Leibov reported that one European royal, female royal, was not the Queen of England, okay? So that means, I think, the Queen of Denmark and the Queen of Belgium. So one of these two queens was already reported as saying to her that it's now time for the great culling, where the new aristocrats will then survive and basically have their technicians and their servants around them, and that's it, Okay, this is now the great culling that we're in. Now, the one thing that this lady didn't really understand, and I'm sure that her Masonic overlords didn't really put it to her like that, is that she is now ripe for picking. And even though they, claim she will be part of the survivors, she absolutely will not, because she's part of the old aristocrats, and they're talking about the new aristocrats, which will not include her. So I think what has to happen at some point, ironically, right, is that the royal families have to wake up that, hang on, we're now on the firing line. And the American billionaires and trillionaires and whatever these people own have to wake up and realize, oh, hang on, we're now the end of the snake's tail, at the peak of our power. We are the next who will be gobbled up. Okay, so I consider the election of Donald Trump is very positive. He has access to other billionaires, and he can get the message across that, hey guys, if you don't cycle out of this madness, at the end of this wash cycle, they will go after you. You are actually the prime target from the get-go, but they will cover that up. The biggest secret is who the real victims are in this. So the people who are falling victim now, like myself, Bill Binney, or those people who lost their businesses during the COVID hoax, they are just small fries. If we are asset stripped, we don't have enough stuff to fire up and, keep the Vatican crime cartel running. Okay, so they are after the people who have so much assets and wealth that when they get asset stripped, the crime cartel can really live off the loot for a very long time after. So that's how people have to think. So ironically, in Europe, the people have to get across to their local royals that they have to start pedaling back and help them cycle the hell out of this madness. And I remind everybody that traditionally all the royals would be, in these secret societies and would be heading them. And this global crime cartel would make them believe that they are going to benefit, but they absolutely will not. Systems analysis points to the fact that they are the next victims, So I personally genuinely hope that Donald Trump gets elected, not least because Joe Biden is, visibly disintegrating on screen, right? But also, I think he's done an amazing job, because I think he's the first US president in history to call out the fake news. Right?
Yes.
That is big. I don't think people realize how big it is when Donald Trump says in his press conferences that he hopes that the New York Times will go bankrupt. I was cheering when I heard that. It's really big. So he's kind of detaching from the old guard and is now pushing forward. I think his real strength would be the following. If he gets reelected, which I'm fairly certain of, if he gets reelected, what he absolutely has got to do is put the people back who were basically sniped out in his first presidency. Amongst those are, for example, General Flynn. And what I've heard now is that what General Flynn, Bill Binney, and Catherine Austin Fitts have in common is two things. All three of them are targets, and all three of them were advocating auditing their respective organizations. I think, General Flynn was trying to audit the CIA and the intel community. Bill Binney was trying to audit the NSA before he left. And Catherine Austin Fitts audited, HUD and a large part of the US government with a software framework that was then stolen by the government, right? So Bill Binney and Catherine Austin Fitts both had their software taken from them and kind of like cannibalized by the crime cartel and then basically rendered defunct, So the crime cartel tells us where its pain points are. The pain points are the money flow. The pain points are things like FASB 56, this new accounting standard, the endless money flow into black projects, the money flow to NSA, to CIA in these places, because these places get not just billions, they get trillions, that they then use to kill us all. So that is the absolute, next step. Meanwhile, here on the ground, we're trying to spread the news about what directed energy weapons are, how we can shield ourselves, which in the case of directed energy weapons is impossible. I can educate people about how to find their chips, how to sue their, healthcare providers and their hospitals that implanted them. But really, what we absolutely need is for the money flow to be switched off ASAP before they kill us all. So I really hope Donald Trump gets reelected. I really hope he brings General Flynn back in, because General Flynn had the right idea, and he was sniped out with these assaults on him precisely because he was going after the money source, And really, I genuinely really hope they hire Bill Binney back in, because all he has to do is basically put his old software back in, and the audit would be done automatically. That's what he told me. So he had a software framework that would audit the entire NSA and all of their management. And the management didn't like that. And that's why they said, you're not doing that. You will never do that. So this is where we're at. And, James, all your work over the last, years, many years, debunking these false flags and everything that I and others have worked for is basically now the basis for everything that we need to do now. We now understand the false flags, we understand the secret symbols, the secret networks that pull them off. We understand what these people are trying to do, basically a Nazi-style takeover. And now in 2020, what we all have to work on, now that we understand what's going on, is shutting this down as quickly as possible. Because the truth is, we are slowly dying, all of us. We just don't notice it.
Catherine, I think you got it all 100% right. Now, here's a development that has startled me. I intermittently do interviews with a fellow named Stu Webb, who is a federal whistleblower. He's a very controversial guy, but his heart's in the right place, no doubt. And he has a very faithful, loyal audience. Well, we did an interview here just a couple of days ago where he explained how he'd gone to a dollar store, and he had items that were less than $5. So he's paying with a $5 bill, and they couldn't make change. And they explained that the Fed has cut off their access to change and asked them to put up this sign that says there will be no more change. They're doing this on a completely fake pretext that coronavirus is spread using money. I mean, it's ridiculous beyond words. He went to a second dollar store, Catherine, and got exactly the same treatment. They have no change. They have this little sign. And he also was told by both that they're phasing out paper money. I mean, in a matter of weeks. They want to go to all digital currency, which has all these obvious benefits from the point of view of the deep state, because then they can micromanage whatever you do. You buy a candy bar or a shotgun, go to a movie, and they know it all. But most importantly, they can then implement a social merit system a la China. And if you don't behave the way they want, they can cut off your financial resources. I mean, there's a sense in which cash is freedom, because you can use cash anywhere for any activity without being monitored. So I think this to me is even more alarming than all the others we've been talking about, which are obviously overwhelming in and of themselves.
I think the first step to do is that everybody who's affected. Now, this is very odd because this is the first time I hear about it, and I have friends who use cash all the time. Now, when you say dollar store, this is probably the place where, people of low income shop, maybe?
Yes.
Predominantly. So it sounds like they're starting to turn off cash for the lowest income people first.
Yes.
Now, I think that will be, again, another round of asset stripping, putting people into distress and so on. So I think what people have to do now, I would say those entrepreneurs who are still in business, they are actually very good, good kind of people to target with this. They have to wake up to what's happening, and they have to launch a court case. Okay. And I would pick entrepreneurs for two reasons. Number one, they can get shit done. Okay. Number two, they know how to have honest businesses. Number three, they might want to use cash in their own business. And that's because even though cash can be cumbersome, for the very same reasons that you just outlined, if you keep using cash, you are only dependent on your customers, many customers. If you use digital payments, many people know that, for example, Visa and MasterCard carve off, a little cut every time you receive a payment. So small shops don't even like to take, credit cards and stuff like that, because and there are only two, really, two big ones worldwide, they will take a cut, okay? So they will have a tax on your income separately as a private company. So what I would do is I would somehow club together, in a team of entrepreneurs who respect and trust each other, and start a court case as quickly as possible to have Supreme Court judgments or court judgments saying that this is illegal. So for the U.S. government to start withdrawing legal tender is illegal. The second step I would do is start setting up, small trusted networks where, people start converting back to using silver, for example, or gold. Gold is, higher value, but silver coins, nobody stops you from doing that, really.
There's also a conjecture floating around, and I would like if it were more than merely a guess, that Trump wants to do a financial reset and that part of it might involve withdrawing currency so he can establish a new currency that's gold backed. I mean, I don't want to think of that as a pipe dream, but, that would be the most positive interpretation one could place on this, which I'm reluctant to do because I believe we have to come to grips with the reality we confront. And it's not at all pleasant. It's extremely ugly and very threatening.
I would call bullshit on that theory, and I think I will explain why. Doing a financial reengineering is one of the most complex things you can do in a nation, and it's actually ultimately a military project, because if you get it wrong, you end up in a military sort of situation, before you know it. So that's number one. There's also legal implications. The other thing is a question of sovereignty in the Constitution, all right? It's still we the people. Now, if none of we the people have a freaking clue that this is happening, it is unconstitutional because it actually touches on the most fundamental thing of the nation, which is its currency. It affects everybody. So doing a currency reset behind closed doors where nobody knows who's involved is not constitutional. By any means. It is the number one way to screw everybody and give a very small secret group immeasurable profits. Okay, number two, I would like to point out that even though Donald Trump himself does amazing things, he wasn't particularly lucky with his advisors. I would like to point out that he recruited Gina Haspel, a known torturer, right, to head the CIA. That was like the biggest, no-no ever. And he has Dr., Fauci, aka Dr. Faux Shit, as I call him, who's been running the last, shit show. So, even though Donald Trump himself might be heading in the right direction, he has so many crooks, criminals, and idiots, right, in his administration that I don't trust these people to tie their shoelaces in darkness, let alone to, re-engineer the currency. I don't think this is what's happening. Also, there has not been a recapture of the Federal Reserve. And as most of your viewers probably know, the Federal Reserve is as federal as FedEx, Federal Express. By the way, I would also put it out right here, right now, that they will wake up to the fact that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is just as federal as FedEx. But, that's for another day. But anyway, so, when you have this private for-profit organization withdrawing currency or fiat currency in the US without having been recaptured and without, all its management having been replaced and replaced by people of highest integrity, of a proven track record, right? I don't think that what's going on is going to be beneficial by the laws of system physics, okay?
Right.
Because the Federal Reserve has been living off a private business plan that is generating astronomical profits for global hidden organized crime cartel. Now, they will not give up their golden cash cow without a major fight. And I have not heard of any major fight having taken place. So, unless something so this is a simple law from system physics, okay? A system will continue as before unless something cataclysmic happens either internally or externally. Have you heard of anything cataclysmic happening in the Federal Reserve? Like, I don't know, somebody running riot and killing everybody inside? I haven't. Have you heard of anything cataclysmic happening from the outside? Like somebody coming in from the outside and sacking everybody? I haven't. So in other words, by the laws of system physics, the Federal Reserve will continue doing what it has been doing. All right. So when it starts withdrawing cash, I think it's exactly the same globalist plan as what's going on in India, but they're trying to, ban cash and basically confiscate everybody's gold.
Catherine, I think something's happened to the Democratic Party. It's gone so far left. I mean, it's not just socialist. It appears to be communist, actually cultural Marxism, destroying all the statues and monuments. So we don't have a historical identity of our nation. In these democratic cities, they have these strict gun control laws, which leads to the highest gun violence in the nation. I mean, you overlay an electoral map with a gun crime map, and it's all the Democratic controlled areas. And then speaking of excrement, we have these formerly marvelous, beautiful cities of San Francisco and Seattle, and they have masses of homeless people. They're defecating, urinating in the streets. They're doing nothing to clean it up. I find this just unbelievable. I mean, what's your take? What in God's name is going on?
Okay, here's this. You know how a while back in this interview, I pointed out that when you have somebody who's a governor, right, actually what it means according to the dictionary is that he's governing, a territory for a foreign power. Okay, so he's a colonial master, right? So in other words, all your governors by design and by the language implications are crown agents. They are governing the US territory for the old masters, the crown. Now you have two types of governors. You have the Republican governors and the Democrats. Now the difference probably goes back. I mean, it's not quite so cleanly cut, right? Because let's remember that George Bush was, I think, a Republican, right? But okay, by and large, there's a massive difference between a republic and a democracy. Okay, democracy is mob rule. So whoever pays the mob, right? Whoever pays more than 50% will rule. But, in a republic, so I think it's Res Publica, the Latin name, that is really, a nation for the people. So if you're looking for something that is we the people and for the people and so on, that is by definition a republic, not a democracy. Okay, so I mean, just by language and by historical precedent, the people who wanted to free themselves of colonial power typically tried to set up a republic, Now, there were some Masonic frauds. For example, I think it was the East German Republic, right? Democratic Republic or something like that. What's the English name for the, in German, it's called the German Democratic Republic. That's the DDR. Now, you can't be a democracy and a republic at the same time, really, strictly speaking. So there was like a Masonic little, double speak there. But ultimately, there's a fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans, okay? So, and I think this is partially what's being played out. I think not everybody in the Republican Party is basically of the Nazi Bush, lineage, but actually, takes the values and the meaning of the Republic seriously, which means that ultimately you have a nation of sovereign people who will all individually, be responsible and take care of their own stuff, including their own self-defense. So you have the right to bear arms, you have your freedom of speech, you have the freedom to, become your own, form your own government, your own associations, and so on. So I think, I would say it's the Crown Corporation taking over these Democrats, and for historical reasons, it's easier to take over the Democrats.
They're also going full blown, with the coronavirus, with the social distancing, mask wearing. They're making it mandatory in various areas, even though it's harmful to human beings. I mean, you're not replenishing the oxygen in your bloodstream. Your cells, therefore, are going to die. You're going to put additional stress on your cardiovascular system. The masks accumulate various bacteria and viruses themselves. I mean, everything about this mask wearing is bad for human beings and other living things, and yet they're going at it whole hog. This Governor Newsom of California is treating California as though we're a separate nation state. He's become absolutely tyrannical, but he's not alone. Other of these Democrat governors are acting similarly. Will Mayer in Michigan, bizarre. I mean, some of their dictates, even Cuomo in New York. I mean, I just am baffled, Catherine, at how this Democratic Party has lost its way. I mean, most of my life I voted Democrat. I voted for Bill Clinton twice. I even voted for Barack Obama twice. But when it came to Hillary versus Trump, it was a no-brainer because I knew what a monster, I mean a literal monster, is Hillary Clinton. And yet they put her up as a nominee for president for a major political party when she's just massively corrupt and evil. I mean, just a disgusting human being, not even human in various appropriate moral senses. So it's just baffled me how this has happened in such a seemingly short period of time. And because of your more distant perspective from Switzerland and for other reasons, any help you can give to me to sort this out would be most welcome.
Okay, here's something. I wanted to do a broadcast. I have been, for personal reasons, because a family member was being attacked and tortured. I haven't done a broadcast in a long time, and I wanted to do a broadcast, on basically the 4th of July, and I held back. And that's because, it was Independence Day, and I wanted to do a big broadcast about so-called Independence Day, which is actually a big fat fraud. I think based on what my analysis, a lot of these, for example, the Declaration of Independence has the Crown logo plastered all over it. And I think the American people didn't realize that from the get-go, they were infiltrated by Crown agents at all levels, okay? So I think what you're seeing is that for many, many, many decades, there was the American people were lulled into this belief that they are independent. And what you're seeing right now is what I would call a big global Masonic shit show coming down the pipe. And you suddenly realize that a lot of public figures in your country go along with it wholesale, okay? Now that's because, I would say, they are Crown agents. You suddenly see the unmasking of the infiltrators who do not stand up for the values and the principles in the Constitution of the United States. Okay, so in a sense, they're doing a public service for the first time in their lives by unmasking themselves. Okay, and I think everybody, it's not just in the US, it's also the case in Switzerland and other places like Germany that wrongfully thought they are independent and something else but a colony. But what we all have to do is go away from these labels, black and white and Republican and Democrat, lean back and just remember those things we all agree on. There's a subset that we all want, regardless if you're black or white or low income, high income, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're American, European or Iranian or Chinese, right? Most of us want good education, good healthcare, safety and security, in our homes and outside in the streets and so on. We want a stable currency, no inflation. We want to be able to build up savings and so on, and kind of steadily improve our lives and our environment. Now, while these differences like black and white and income do not matter, there's another hidden parameter that makes actually the ultimate difference. And that is, are you a member, an insider of this global crime cartel, or are you not? You can be an insider at any income range and any skin color and in any country of the world, because this is a global crime cartel. So, a local gang stalker on food stamps is a member of the crime cartel, even though he has very low income, or no actual income by himself. But a high paid senator, right, is also a member of the crime cartel. So that is the only distinction that actually matters anywhere on the planet. And this is a crucial distinction, because if you are within the crime cartel, you will benefit from such astronomical pay for very little and probably no honest work whatsoever, right? Whereas when you're outside of this crime cartel, your life will be extremely hard. You will have to make your own income. You will have to put up with bad healthcare, or actually even healthcare that tries to kill you, so-called healthcare, and many, many other things. So the crime cartel uses the symbol of the umbrella, okay? There are people who are under the umbrella or the umbrella corporation, and there are those people who are outside. When you're not under the umbrella, you get wet. It can be very unpleasant, right? Potentially lethal. When you're under the umbrella, you will stay dry. So what we have to do around the world is actually make a list of, how these people behave, our leaders, our neighbors, our family members, even our close friends sometimes, And are they inside the crime cartel, outside? You know, most people don't have family members or friends who are members of the crime cartel, but they'll likely have a governor or somebody who's a member of this crime cartel. Same with judges and your local police officers. And according to that distinction, you have to group together with the people who do not benefit from these criminal business plans. You have to group, across party lines and skin color and income brackets. And actually all of you agree what you want. And I promise you it will be very similar things, and then work on how you're going to achieve it. And at the same time, how you're going to jail, contain, and, basically annul the bad influence of the members of this global organized crime cartel. So, everybody should look at their governors and say, okay, how did they behave during the coronavirus? If you're in Michigan and you saw, I think Dave Jander calls her Commandant Klink, Gretchen Whitmer, well, I would say she's a crown agent, okay? If you're somewhere else in California, you're probably under the, governance of a crown agent. And then you all should think, hang on a second, why do we, as a supposed independent nation, deal with governors at all? Aren't governors some people who, govern a colony? Could we potentially think of a different name for heads of state? And could we maybe form new states and arrest these people and have new, officers of state? Could we just reform the whole system? I think this is what we all have to work on.
Catherine, I want to mention to the chat room that if they have any questions they'd like for you and me to discuss, that they'd like to address to you, to please put them in caps here. I have the chat right here to my side. So if anyone there in the chat room has questions for Dr. Horton and me, please do pose them now. Catherine, it's just such a joy to have this opportunity to speak with you again. We've done several earlier interviews, which I've greatly valued. I think you're really very comprehensive in your understanding of these issues and have great insight. And I'd like to give you more opportunity to elaborate on what you think we, the American people, or the world, need most to understand about the situation we're in today, which is as dire as any I have ever contemplated, hypothetically or otherwise, in my life.
Yeah. You know what? For me, it is, what's it called? There's a literary term that is this kind of describes these, literary works about coming of age and waking up and finally dealing with adult problems, okay? And what I see everywhere in Europe and in America is that we have been dumped down into a childlike state where most of us don't even know how our systems work. Most of us don't know how a telephone works, right? But most of us don't really know how the courts work, or the currency, or taxation, or the police, or anything that actually matters and keeps us really secure and going. Okay, now that is a childlike state. And I think if you go back to previous centuries, I think there were times when the nation was just a bit more educated, more enlightened, and more kind of awake to the things that truly matter. And I think that the settlers who came to the United States, they were probably one of the most, the sharpest, because they were very entrepreneurial. They left their, home countries, and they were very astutely aware how important it is, what sort of constitution, system of governance, and so on you have. Okay. And we have to actually relearn all that. And, learning by doing is probably the best way. And this is now for real learning by doing, or rather learning by trying to survive. So we all have to figure out, how do our courts work? How the hell do we get into the courts and enforce our rights? How the hell do we eject out, obviously, criminal and corrupt judges so that we can have our rights enforced? And how can we put the Constitution back into action, which I remind everybody is at the moment out of action because the US is under war powers. And this is why the president keeps sending down executive orders, right? That is not a normal state of government, that you have one person, no matter how benign and how useful at the moment, basically having dictatorial edicts being sent down the pipe, So we all have to remember, hang on a second, what are these executive orders? Why do we have them? How can we cycle out of these war powers and this war state? How can we get back to functioning courts And how the hell can we all revert back to a solid currency? You know, how can we avoid the pitfalls of, Bitcoin, which my personal opinion is that's going to be another big fat hoax, cartel hoax on people who don't really understand computing, nor do they understand currencies, right? But ultimately, James, we are right now in the death throes of an old, stupid, undereducated society. And hopefully what's going to re-emerge is a very kind of like recalibrated, educated type of nation, you know? I hope so. I really hope that this is what's going to come out of all this.
There are so many troubling aspects of contemporary American society, including that the education system seems to have cashed in its chips for some kind of social promotion, worrying about how students would feel if they weren't passed, if they weren't moved up in grades with their own age group, stuff that is just the antithesis of a serious system of learning. That it's just, become political correctness has become a devastating mechanism for undermining critical thinking, and it has become ubiquitous. I'm just stunned. Where making, very simple, obvious points becomes controversial because someone might be offended by the truth. I mean, Catherine, that's really beyond the pale.
You know what? I have seen a renaissance, a type of renaissance, while I was, maybe people don't know, I was for 12 years in academics. I was at the University of Oxford for 12 years. And out of that, I was an undergraduate, 4 I was a PhD student, and 4 I was a fellow at an Oxford college. So I've seen the junior common room, the undergraduates, the PhD level and postdocs, and the research fellow level, right? The tutors and teachers level. And during my time in academia, I have actually seen several cycles and reversions to old values. Number one was, for example, the drinking culture of the 1990s. So in the 1990s, there were binge drinking parties starting in Germany that kind of carried over in the early 2000s. Now, when I was an undergraduate at Oxford, binge drinking was still a thing. When I became a PhD student and I started teaching undergraduates, I discovered that they actually were not going to parties anymore. Number one, because tuition fees, especially in Oxford, have increased tenfold, right, from 1,000 to pretty much 10,000, so 9,000 pounds per year. So they couldn't afford to drink. But more importantly, they were paying so much for education that these kids were determined to get the last out of it. They had no time to party anymore, right? And suddenly, my students were brilliant. I really loved them, and I loved teaching them. Of course, they went to parties occasionally, and occasionally alcohol was involved. But it was nothing like the sort of binge drinking sort of culture that I'd grown up with at school, and I'd still seen at university, even at an elite university. So suddenly, the new generation was much more serious, much more hardworking, and they didn't want any bullshit, basically. They were determined that they were there at Oxford. They were paying through the nose for 3 or 4 years. But when they were done, they did want to have that high-paying job to pay back all the tuition fees and have some, standard of living. So that gave me a lot of hope, because back then when I was going through, this drinking culture was happening, and ultimately not just dumbing down by not doing any work, but actually killing off brain cells with an awful lot of alcohol, I was pretty desperate. I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen to my generation? And lo and behold, the new generation is very serious, very focused. Now, I actually have a lot of hope, okay? And I say that as somebody who has taught at Oxford. I would say that the old method of teaching was in some places pretty shit, not very effective, and hopelessly outdated. Now, the new way of teaching, which is something that I benefit from myself to this day, is when you are going onto YouTube or, the internet and finding instructional videos for stuff that you really need to solve right now, and you learn by actually solving problems you run into. That is brilliant. So what I see is that now there are math, lessons and math tutors online for school children. That wasn't there in my day. So if your teacher is abysmal, you can go on YouTube and actually have the best math teacher give you a private lesson on your phone. How great is that, you know? And the same will happen with university teaching, you know? So I think what will happen is we're going to cycle to much higher efficiency in certain departments. If people want to learn something these days, they truly can. This was not the case, you know, even in the year 2000, right? That was not the case, but now people actually can learn anything. So I think what's going to happen is that as young people go, you know, maybe they were part of some, I don't know what, they were paid by George Soros and they were rioting and I don't know what, tearing down statues, say, okay, fine. They can do that for some time, but tearing down statues is not going to pay the bills. So at some point when they actually are faced with, okay, I need some professional qualifications, I need to work, I need to solve problems in my workplace, suddenly you need education. And you end up with a streamlining towards exactly the type of education you genuinely need. And you suddenly get rid of a lot of boomph and unnecessary crap that we were all taught at school, you know? So I really hope that what you know, the nation will do is actually cycle to a much better system through exactly these problems.
You know, I think the points you're making about, as it were, practical matters are impeccable. But when it comes to, you know, more reflective disciplines, say in the humanities, the literature, and the arts, I think there's no substitute for interaction between teachers and students in a classroom setting. And I'm distraught that there's so much talk now about distance learning for, you know, elementary and high school students here in the United States. I mean, the quality of education, Catherine, is just going to approach zero at its limit. I mean, this is a catastrophe. We're going to have a whole, you know, generation that's been sandbagged by this phony coronavirus pandemic and have massive gaps in their educational experience. And there's so many ways in which it will never be compensated for. I mean, it will be a permanent loss. And this is, to me, devastating.
You know what? I still have hope. I actually genuinely have hope because when, you know what, my family and I, we lived through the implosion of Eastern Europe, you know, through the communist asset stripping and so on. And things were really dire, you know, and many good things were just destroyed and we thought probably forever. And every single time there's some sort of rebirth, okay? And I think ultimately what it comes down to is that human experience and human skills that are really necessary are ultimately limited. You know, there are only so many things you can do on planet Earth. You know, only so many instruments you can play, only so many philosophical, you know, branches, and only so many things you can talk about. You know, but at the end of the day, there's this resilience in the population. You know, when you dumb down people too much, they will start feeling the loss of it. They will start going out and searching for it themselves. It will inspire others. So there's always this rebound, you know? And I genuinely believe, I mean, you mentioned, for example, classroom teaching. Now, classroom teaching at school level in my subjects, maths and physics, failed 80% of the students. I mean, I did fine, but I also didn't benefit from the teacher. I just taught myself. But I was, for example, when I was younger and at school myself, I was teaching other students and I was helping them with their maths and physics, bringing them up to speed. So That's when I saw how abysmal teaching actually was. So it wasn't that great to start with, you know. So the same with university teaching. Do you remember the days when you had these lecture theaters filled with 150 people and after the first 5 minutes there was no oxygen to breathe anymore and staying awake was actually the biggest challenge, you know? Do we need that?
Catherine, there are a couple of questions here, and I want to squeeze them in. I don't think we're shut off automatically at the top of the hour, and I'd like to carry over for a few minutes since we got a late start because of the technical glitches. Here was one about the looking at their pupils with an ultraviolet and getting green. I mean, this is a very practical type of thing that you've discussed before, how you know whether you're chipped. Can you address that?
Yeah, no, number one, this is a running investigation. Keep that in mind. And I am not a medical person or biotech person. I don't really know how the cartel does its things. I'm trying to run an investigation to get there, okay? So this test of using ultraviolet light and kind of shining it in your eye, please don't really shine it too closely, just shine it from a distance. If you use black light or an ultraviolet torch and you realize that your pupils like the black hole in the middle of your eye suddenly start reflecting at funny colors like turquoise, bright turquoise, or purple, or like really bright colors, or you see structure on your iris, or it looks like it's on your iris, but it's actually on the surface of your eye, then you're likely implanted. Okay. Now, I say that because there's a book called the Global Brain Chip and Mesogens by Dr. Hildegard Stalinger, and in there she mentions something which is called I think it's the Eye of Horus effect, and that is exactly this: shining ultraviolet into somebody's eyes and seeing that their pupils suddenly glow in dark. Okay, they suddenly reflect in funny colors, which can be an indication for nanotechnology and other funky technology having been implanted in the eye. So that's one, investigation that I have to follow. Now, my personal experience with this is, number one, my eyes do glow under ultraviolet light, bright turquoise, which is exactly this test that's in the book. There's also Melinda Kidder, a private investigator for Columbia Investigations, who is, I think, one of two private investigators helping targets find their body implants. She does the ultraviolet test and notes down if any sort of unnatural colors appear in the eye. Now, when I tried to do this test on other people, I found the following. Every single time somebody's eyes were reflecting in bright turquoise or purple and turquoise combinations, I also found radio frequency emissions, typically from their neck, with a bug detector. So I have 100% correlation between eyes reflecting fluorescent green, bright green or purple, with radio frequency emissions coming out of the body that I can see with a bug detector. Very localized, polarized radiation, indicative of microchip implants. Nothing to do with the eye, two independent measurements. In those cases where I didn't see any reflections of turquoise, I literally use an ultraviolet torch and I, shine it on their eye, and the pupils look just as pitch black as they do now under normal light. In those cases, I also didn't find any microchip implants with a bug detector. Okay, so I have no idea how these implants, work in detail. I have this one indicator from the Global Brain Chip and Mesogens, a published book that contains photographs of chips that have been removed out of, I think, mostly Americans, by the way, right? So there are photographs of actual chips removed from people's bodies in that book. There, this Eye of Horus effect is mentioned. Melinda Kidder, who works with Dr. Hildegard Stalinger, who wrote this book, checks for these ultraviolet implants. And when I did my own checks on the targets that approached me and other people who didn't know that they were targeted, I found 100% correlation with the reflections in turquoise under ultraviolet light with radio frequency emissions coming out of the...
So he might want to test for radio frequency emissions to discover where he's chipped, because if you have 100% correlation, almost certainly he's been chipped. Here's another question. What do you think of Archbishop Vigano's letter? I'm not sure I know the letter.
Yeah, I don't know the letter. I don't know what he did or was working on or what he wrote. Unfortunately, I have to pass. I would have to do some internet research to find out. But
Yes, if they want to expand, perhaps O.W. Jones could add another chat here and expand on the Archbishop's letter so that Catherine and I would know the issue you'd like us to address. I've got a question here for me about my Boston bombing videos, of which another member of the chat room observes I have numerous. But let me say that a lot of my videos can be found at 153news.net, 153news.net, under the name of Gus Chambers, oddly enough. Gus Chambers has posted hundreds of my videos at 153news.net. Now, there's a more recent channel under my name on BitChute, but it has, these real deal reports and my more recent interviews as here on the FETS Presents and the Conspiracy Guy and so forth. But if you look there and can't find, come back and, give me the chat question, or you can write to me. The easiest email to reach me would be Jim at moonrockbooks.com. That's just the easiest to remember. Jim at moonrockbooks.com. Those are the primary questions here, Catherine. I'm just staggered by the situation we find the world, ourselves in today. And do you believe, you assess it's worse in Europe or worse in America, which would be my surmise, or the UK, or do you see any distinction between various communities around the world?
No, I don't actually. It's just as bad in Europe, as far as I can tell, as it is in America. I also know that there are targets all around the world, and I would just surmise, as a systems analyst, that many more implanted victims exist in the third world just because they were so vulnerable and so accessible. Okay, so I think this is truly a global problem. And I think for once we are truly globally united. Okay, we are fighting the very same crime cartel. In some countries, the criminals are black. In some countries, they are white. Sometimes they are rich. Sometimes they are poor. The truth is, this global organized crime cartel has been recruiting all and sundry. So there is no one parameter. You can't say all the perpetrators are white, or they are black, or they are rich, or they are poor. Surely, I mean, of course, the leadership, the top leadership is fabulously wealthy, but, the crime cartel that you will be dealing with day on day, the people who actually asset trip you, come in all shapes, forms, and sizes,
Here it is, Catherine. The letter is to President Trump blaming the virus riots on the deep state and the deep church at some sort of tipping point for Catholics. I got to admit, I'm not very familiar with the letter. Does that help?
I'm not familiar with the letter. The only thing I can say, I mean, those people who followed my channel know that I interviewed Kevin Annett, who blew the whistle on the crimes of the church and state in Canada, which was the genocide of the native people. And, I have been looking into the Vatican crime cartel. So this guy is an archbishop, so Catholic Church. Well, the only thing I can say about the Catholic Church is the following. It's actually quite a bit, if you think about it, right? But I want to remind everybody that the Catholic Church, for historical reasons, or what I call the Vatican crime cartel, is actually the biggest organized crime cartel in the world. They are the underlying global infrastructure for all of our secret services. All of our secret services. And it's for the following reasons. Kevin Annett uncovered that when people tithe or donate on Sundays in church or whenever, the donation money, 90% of that, or over 90% of that, goes back to HQ. It does not stay in the community, and it most definitely doesn't go to orphans and widows, okay? So when you have this system, that is taking your good faith donation money and is pooling it to one central cartel to ensure that the money doesn't get lost on the way by your criminal minions, you have to have a big surveillance network, a big secret service. So wherever there's a Catholic church, from day dot, there was a secret service network, just to ensure that the money gets from the local church to HQ. So when all these modern intelligence agencies were formed, like MI6 and MI5 and the CIA and the FBI and all these people, they were being formed on this already existent, pretty global secret service infrastructure. When you form a new secret service and there's a bigger network already present, the first thing that's going to happen is infiltration from the bigger network, to the point that the smaller secret network is owned wholesale by the bigger network, controlled and owned. So, I think if this archbishop woke up and realized that, hey, there is something called the deep church, that's already, yay, step number one, right? And it's absolutely true. There is a deep church, but actually there's just a church. It's deep on every local community, and it's certainly in the Vatican HQ.
Catherine, there's one more question about Vatican money. How massive is it? I mean, how much? And also, by the way, child trafficking, Epstein, Maxwell, would you add any thoughts about those?
Yeah, okay. So let's take the Vatican question first. The Vatican crime cartel As far as I know, at some point during the World Wars, also took the gold and the money from the royal households and then gave them IOUs, as far as I know. Now, the former general counsel to the World Bank, Karen Hudes, talks about this, and she says that, pretty much this Vatican crime cartel, the cartel, banking cartel, she calls it, owns all the assets of the world, pretty much, okay? But some of that money they got not just by conquest, but through IOUs that they promised to pay interest on. So apparently, with the accumulated interest, humanity de facto owns more than the Vatican crime cartel. But that aside, the Vatican crime cartel, pretty much in the 13th century, I think there was a papal bull, okay, that's very aptly named, that said that the Pope or the Catholic Church owns all the land in the world. Okay, they just said so. So by church law, that was law. Then they said they own all the cattle, all the living beings, all the human beings on planet Earth. And I think the third papal bull was that they own all the souls and therefore the intellectual property in this world and in the next world. Okay, so by
and in the next,
papal
yes.
decree, they own everything. So much about their wealth. Now, Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and all these people, in my view, Epstein is an MI6 agent, okay? I think Epstein is a crown agent, and it's already been revealed that the money that he supposedly owns as a billionaire, nobody can tell where it comes from, aka he holds that money in trust for the Crown Corporation. I also don't think that Epstein killed himself or was killed. I think Epstein is alive and well, and was funneled out by the Masonic crime cartel for the following reasons. Epstein was a de facto billionaire, so holding, Vatican money in trust, or Crown Corporation money in trust, in my view. If they let this billionaire go down, suddenly all the other billionaires who are equally pedophilic as this guy and equally creepy and, just as big a bunch of serial killers will say, hang on a second, the Crown Corporation is not protecting us anymore. So suddenly, there's an advantage of, stepping out of the Crown Corporation and adopting a different business or survival strategy. So as soon as they let one of their billionaires go down, all the other billionaires will look at each other and say, staying around here is not that great a proposition anymore. So for this reason, everything had to be, undertaken, that Epstein was funneled out alive and well. And I think within their own circles, and I think cartel signaling indicates that, he's alive and well, and he's probably attending some sort of pedophile party somewhere in, the various private compounds around the world.
We have one more question about the social media big tech censorship, which it's asking, is it an illusion that censorship is independent of government? I think Congress made this colossal blunder years ago with the, giving independence of liability to these social media, Facebook, Google, so forth. On the ground, they'd operate as a neutral platform, analogous to a library, where the library isn't responsible for the content of the individual books. And there was about a 15-year period, a golden age, when you could put up any blog or any video and they were all there, and it was absolutely fantastic. But now, of course, they've compromised the way they operate. They're doing massive censorship. It all appears to be to benefit the left by suppressing conservative or right-wing views, no matter how well-founded they may be. I find that all appalling, but I believe that Congress is going to have to reconsider this, unless you believe that Trump could do something by means of an executive order.
I thought he already had an executive order. Maybe that was just spoken about, but it hasn't actually been written yet or signed yet. I don't know. I thought Trump was thinking about having an executive order.
Well, what happened was they made the blunder of trying to censor his tweets. I mean, how dumb can you get? Here's a man who's a genius at public relations. He really knows the media, and I agree with you 100%. Calling out the fake news media was an astonishing contribution. Catherine, you've been wonderful. I just want to point out for our audience that if they would like to meet you, this wonderful person with a world-class mind. She will be one of my featured speakers in Austin, Texas on the 7th and 8th of November at the Question Everything 2020 conference. You can find more details about it if you go online to Mix, M-I-X, capital N, mixnstream.com. It'll lead you to the program, which we're updating. And I have a question for Catherine after we conclude the broadcast about one more speaker she's mentioned several times who might be a perfect addition. Catherine, I can't thank you enough for coming on tonight. I mean, it's been wonderful, and I know it's early in the morning for you, and, you know, it took a special effort. So I think it's just sensational that you were here. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. It's always an honor to address you and the audience. It really is.
Well, you're sensational. This was a great visit. Stick around just a sec while I close this. I want to thank everyone out there for being here. Thank you all. See you soon.